on today.
You're listening to an encore presentation of this program, KCAA, the Inland Talk Express.
I am Attorney Zulu, Justice Watch Crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir. Today, like each week, we'll be discussing critical legal issues affecting our community. Our topic today is corporal punishment. Is spanking a viable option for parental discipline? And does it prevent or perpetuate criminal behavior? Joining us in our discussion today is Arlene Banks and Linda Harvey. Arlene Banks is the founder of the Community Center for Healthy Minds, CCHM. As of 2014, the Community Center for Healthy Minds was approved as a domestic violence provider with the Riverside County Probation Department. She is a graduate from the University of Phoenix, where she acquired a bachelor's degree in human services and a master's degree in marriage family therapy. Arlene Banks is also a certified counselor for domestic violence, parenting, child abuse, and anger management, and currently advocates for domestic violence victims in the District Attorney Victims Office. Linda Harvey is a retired single mother, and she just happens to be my mother. So, at any rate, so today we'll be talking about this issue of corporal punishment, which remains a controversial issue here in the United States. The American Academy of Pediatrics and numerous other professional organizations have come down firmly against the use of physical punishment by parents. And the laws regarding corporal punishment vary from state to state. I believe there's about 19 states that currently allow the striking of a child in any school setting. And of the 31 states and the District of Columbia that ban the practice in public schools, only New Jersey and Iowa also include private schools. And many schools give the misbehaving child a choice between suspension and being beaten with a paddle. So again, I mean, this actually remains an extremely controversial issue with regards to corporal punishment. I think that for many of us, I think generationally, I know that in my generation, corporal punishment was something that was very, very common, and it was not seen to have been something that is negative or would have a negative impact on a child if it's done in a particular way that's not overly obsessive, I guess you would say. And so I guess the question is, what is corporal punishment, right? And then there's a difference between what is corporal punishment and when is it physical abuse. I know that there are individuals who believe that corporal punishment is basically just the use of physical pain in response to a behavior that has been deemed inappropriate, and then physical abuse is something that would go beyond what would be the norm of physical pain in response to this behavior. There are those that believe that basically corporal punishment in and of itself is actually physical abuse. So I guess I'm going to begin by speaking with Ms. Banks and get her initial response to her position as far as corporal punishment is concerned.
There's let's talk about the definitions first. The definition of corporal punishment is to cause psychological and physical pain. Discipline is to teach by teaching children responsibility for their own actions. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we take the word punishment back in the day as punishing your children, which is totally different from discipline.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so when you say punishment, like corporal punishment and discipline, when you say punishment, you're thinking that any kind of action against a child or any kind of, or imposing any kind of I guess for lack of a better term, any kind of discipline on a child that would cause any type of pain would actually be punishment. However, something other than causing physical or mental harm on the child would be called discipline.
No.
Right?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay. Discipline is to teach by teaching the children responsibility. And the other one is psychological and causing pain is corporal punishment. It's punishment.
So in essence, basically, corporal punishment basically is not discipline. It is actually more or less of some sort of mental or physical punishment.
Yes.
But discipline is actually considered to be something completely different.
Yes.
In other words, trying to impose some sort of action on a child other than causing mental or physical harm.
Yes.
In order to correct action or to impose some sort of lesson, I guess you could say, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And what about you, Ms. Harvey? As far as the issue of the difference between corporal punishment and physical abuse?
Well, corporal punishment and physical abuse, the way you put it like that, it's almost the same. Corporal punishment is a major thing, which I wouldn't consider corporal punishment. I might be mistaken, but I wouldn't consider corporal punishment as a spanking as a corporal punishment.
Okay. So from your
now, physical abuse is like if you take your child and you spank him so hard that there's webs all over him. Excuse the language, but his little behind is red and all that, and he's bleeding. Now that's physical abuse, and that's not a discipline. Spanking is, to me, is different. I mean, if I spank you, I wouldn't spank you so hard that you would need to go to the doctor or that you couldn't sit down. And that's the difference as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. So
I don't see anything wrong with spanking.
Okay. So for you, that what you're thinking is that basically spanking is within the realm of discipline, and the other part, anything beyond spanking, and when you say spanking in a manner in which you said it doesn't cause visual physical abuse or preventing someone from sitting down, from your perspective, that's within the realm of discipline. But if beyond that would be
it would be physical abuse.
Physical abuse. Okay.
Not necessarily. Like I said, like you might hurt just a little bit, but you wouldn't want to spank your child so hard and so much that child cannot sit down. Yeah.
Right. So I guess we'll go here. Do
you want them to hurt? That's been fear in children.
Yeah.
So what's that?
Do you want them to hurt?
Well, they can hurt just a little bit, but not so much that, I know my mother spanked me. And, I felt it for a little while and then it went away. And I don't think it affected me mentally. I don't think it, especially mentally, it did make me want to, every time I see somebody reading this article, to go out and fight. My mother spanked me, and my mother now, once I was grown, we were the best of friends. My mother been dead over 20-something years, and I still miss my mother. Sometime at night, I even still cry because I can't talk to her. She didn't hurt me so bad that I go the next few days, I sit down and jump up because, that's where Mama spanked me. Like I said, it hurt a little while, and that was it. And it also taught me that if you do something wrong, there's a consequences to when you do something wrong. Ever since I can remember going in a store, I wouldn't dare pick up something or try to rob somebody because I know that if I do this and it's wrong, that I won't be punished for it one way or the other. The basic punishment is generally jail.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's death, especially when you see these kids that do things and they try to run away. And my idea is that, it teaches kids that if you do something wrong, you have to pay for it. There's consequences. But you don't have to dog that child out and do certain things, cause great physical, punishment like that. But it does teach the child that if they do something wrong, there's consequences.
Yeah. Well, I think that, going on the other side, some of the organizations, especially some of the psychologists and other individuals and other child specialists, are suggesting that it has the opposite effect.
Yes.
According to people like Stacy Patton,
yes,
and some of these other individuals have actually written and stated that the majority of the individuals who are incarcerated actually had been subjected to some sort of, corporal punishment. Now, I don't really know when they say corporal punishment to what degree they're speaking of, if they're talking about a spanking or how far it goes. But at least that's the analysis of those professionals. Is that correct?
Yes. So you have to also remember, the definitions are totally wrong. Discipline is to teach by assuming responsibility. Punishment is to cause psychological and physical pain. As far as corporal punishment, it's the same thing as punishment. See, when we grew up, yes, back in the day, there was whippings, spankings, probably some severe than others. But it does harm a child psychologically as they grow up. And the reason why I say that is because of all the experiences that I've had of 263 individuals a week has called them traumatic experiences growing up, because they not only learned it, but they also became violent themselves. And so what they do is, generation from generation, you spank your children, this generation, they're used to it. Now these children have just learned what you have just gotten, and that pattern keeps going. And now today it's totally different. See, a little bit back in the day, it was okay to spank your children. Today it's totally different. Totally different. Things are happening with individuals psychologically, mentally, mental abuse, physical abuse, mental illness. And it's happening out here so much, and it's so dominant in our society as far as domestic violence, child abuse. And all you have to do right about now is to take your 2 fingers and pull a child by his ear. You have a child abuse case. Because, see, there's another way of being able to communicate with your children other than to make them fearful of you, because that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to become fearful. They're not even going to want to come talk to you. We have to be able to communicate and allow our children to be able to communicate with us. You have to remember, children have feelings, and they have thoughts, and their opinions are valid, and they are to be respected. So if they don't get that, you're going to have some kind of resentment. Not only are you going to have resentment, you're going to have a rebellious child.
Well, Rosa, you're the youngest person at the table.
Yes.
So with you being the youngest person at the table, I want you to give me, your opinion with regards to the issue of a corporal punishment.
Well, I feel like growing up, I grew up in a spanking culture. And that really enabled me to respect my mom and my dad and have that respect. And it wasn't much of fear. It was just a respect of disappointment that I gained through the spanking when I was younger. But then again, that's just my case. But I do see that now in our culture, new parents and growing up, a lot of them do not spank their children. And a lot of them do not have that discipline because of what they've learned or what they've been psychologically kind of grown up with, to not spank their kids because they have that trauma in a way. But for me, I feel like it helped me. Like, my parents disciplined me in a way where it was like spanking, and it wasn't to the max. It would hurt, but it did teach me kind of to to learn to not misbehave because I knew I was going to get that spanking, or sometimes that pull in the ear, which was weird, or those eyes.
The look.
Yeah, the look. But I feel like in a way it did kind of create a certain specific disconnect within my parents when it came to talking about feelings.
Yes.
Because I was so fearful of communicating with my parents about my feelings because I didn't want a disappointment.
Right.
So I feel like that's where that mini kind of disconnect came forward. But as far as me in the future having children and spanking them and all of that, I feel like I would want to incorporate a little bit of it, but at the same time I would try to stay a little bit away from it. So I'm 50-50 on this issue, but seeing my culture and how kids are growing up nowadays too, kind of growing up without that guidance from their parents, and really you have kids calling the police on their parents. You know, you have kids who are brave enough to go out there and talk back to their parents, which is something that I couldn't do. I couldn't even picture that because I knew I was going to get that look or that spanking. So that's where I see the disconnect of maybe it's kind of wrong in a way sometimes to stir away from it fully, because I feel like it is in a way necessary to create that.
I think that basically being a grandparent and basically, you know, obviously, you know, I was, you know, there was corporal punishment growing up for me, but it was not something that I got very often. I mean, I think that probably I could count on one hand how many times it happened. And I think that once you get it, then obviously all you had to do is show me the belt, and I'm you know what I'm saying? I didn't, you know, I was kind of like I didn't do it anymore. And, you know, one of the interesting things is that, you know, I got a whooping from spanking from my mother and my grandmother. But the person that I feared the most was probably my grandfather. But the irony is he never whooped me. But I knew that he could, right? And it kind of like, I figured that if he gave me one, it would really hurt, right? So, you know, it's kind of one of those things. But then, now, when you see younger people doing it, it's not really... At least in my opinion, I think that it's more than just whooping. You know what I'm saying? Because I mean, nowadays when you know you see someone getting a spanking and then they hug the child, that never happened to me. And so, in other words, what I'm saying is that
confusing.
Then what happens is I believe that people believe that if I act up, I'll get love. You see what I'm saying? And so sometimes people don't know how to spank people. You know what I mean? Because I can't, you know, like for example, like when I spanked my children, they couldn't run to their mother or grandmother because you just got in trouble. So it you know, it's a wrap, right? But now younger people, you know, I think that they do the opposite thing. It's like if one person believes in that type of punishment and the other person don't believe in that type of punishment, it kind of sends mixed messages to a young child that says, it almost gives a complete opposite message if it's not imposed properly, right? So if it's like, if I'm going to get a hug when I get a spanking, you know, I think it might give off the wrong thing. So I think it's more to it than just the spanking itself, right? And so I think that which complicates the whole subject matter, because now, you know, like you're saying, Ms. Banks, that obviously there are situations where people who do get subjected to corporal punishment, where it could have a negative psychological effect. Yes. If it's given, you know, it's clear that I think everybody would agree that if you whoop a child too hard, that's abuse. I don't think anybody disagrees with that, number one. But number two, I think it also makes it more complicated because there's a lot. If you know, if you're just whooping the child and that's all you're doing, and there's nothing else that goes along with it, then I think that basically that's also a negative thing.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So I think it creates a more, you know, you kids can't whoop a child for everything that they do. You know what I mean? There has to be a lesson behind it. And sometimes, you know, spanking a child has, you know, some people replace spanking a child with, they think that parenting begins with spanking and ends with spanking, and that's all. Then that's also a negative thing.
It sure is.
So it's a little bit, you know, complicated, and I think how it happened, generally the way you were disciplined and the effect that it had on you will have an impact on how you feel about corporal punishment, right? Yeah. If you got slapped on the hand every now and then, and you got a little spanking on the bottom every now and then, I'm sure you'll have a different attitude than those who are like, man, getting beat with, objects.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I'm talking about objects, is anything that they can get their hands on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be back in the day,
Yeah.
anything you get your hands on, but today, you're going to have a child abuse case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, today, it's easier to be able to allow your children to communicate with you versus having to get a spanking, because we all make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Children make mistakes too, but yet we want to punish them for making a mistake when they learned it from us.
Yeah.
That's the part that I have an issue with.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And and then they become rebellious. Well, who are you? In the back of their mind, subconsciously unaware of.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you?
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you on that part. If the adults doing bad in the house and different things,
Yes.
I would say they shouldn't be trying to punish their kids. But I would like to say is that, okay, I did spank you. Did you ever feel like you couldn't communicate with me?
No, I never
I
felt
think
like
we talked pretty good. And I always felt that I could talk to my mother.
Yeah.
And another thing is, now I've tried some of the standing in the corner stuff, because before we left Tennessee, I used to keep children. But I did, at the time, I did tell the parents, I said, now, I will keep your child. I said, and I expect your child to mind me and do what I say. If your child cannot mind me, I said, I will spank them. I will not beat them, but I will spank them. And so if you have a problem with that, I cannot keep your child. And there's only one person I know that didn't let me keep their child. Everybody else kept their child, and the children, they seem to love me. Every time I go home, everybody want to see me. Take me out to eat. Here's Miss Linda's back. Are you back to stay, Miss Linda? That was before they got grown. But I tried standing in the corner. And I was sitting there one day. The first one that got in trouble was one of my granddaughters, one of his daughters. I said, go stand in the corner. Then here comes this other little girl. You stand in that corner. And then here comes this little boy. And what I found out they were doing, they were standing in the corner, and they were making little signs with each other and laughing and going up. And they loved standing in the corner. That wasn't a punishment for them. That was like a game. So I said, oh, you can't stand in the corner, huh? But, like if I spank somebody, I let them know while they're getting a spanking. I just don't spank them and say, go sit down. I go there. I said, now you got this little spanking. You did X, Y, and Z. Do you understand? And they would let me know, yes, ma'am, or no. And I would, go over with it, and stuff. But like I say, like now, okay, they've taken chastisement out of school. The teachers can't say nothing to the kids. Basically, almost the parents can barely say something to the kids, depending on or do anything to kids. And since that's happened, you see all these shootings. I mean, before, I guess, 1980 something, you didn't see kids going to school shooting up kids because somebody called them a dope or fun. You look funny. You didn't see that stuff. And me, like going in the stores, it was this little boy. He was showing out, falling out in the floor, throwing stuff off the shelves, and going up. And his mother said, well, I guess she finally got tired. She said, if you don't stop, I'm going to spank you. And he looked at it, he said, and put his hands on his little hips. He was a small child. I don't think you know who you talking to. If I said that to my mama, like I said, she just spanked me that hard, but I think if I said that to her, she might would have knocked me out. Yeah. But, like you're talking about spanking somebody with anything you can get your hands on. You hear comedians say that all the time, and I don't understand it because I don't remember my mama taking what you call it, one of them plugs, one of those
extension cards.
Extension cards and whipping me with it, or taking anything, or taking her big shoe up and whooping me with it, or taking her hand. And I don't remember my mother. My mother didn't do that. I think so.
Well,
maybe they did it this way. I don't know.
Well, they probably did it all over the place. It's just that
Yes.
basically it's different individuals have probably different, experiences with the.
Yeah, and I think it's just a culture shift, because I can remember when I was coming up, the neighbors were allowed to do it. My mother gave the neighbor, if you see my child doing something wrong, give him that spanking. Even when I went to school, if I did something wrong, they sent me to the principal. I can remember getting that paddle, and believe me, I thought twice about it. I wouldn't say that it. Now that I look back on it, I thought twice about doing anything. Even when my grandmother whooped me, my mother whooped me, I thought about that. I thought about doing something wrong, and I wouldn't say it allowed this disconnect between me and my parents. I think what it did was it put me in a place. Now that didn't mean that I didn't go off and start doing things on my own, but it wasn't. I can't equate it to the whoopings. I can't say I did this or I acted out this way because of the whoopings. But I firmly believe that there has to be some form of consequences. And now that I have my own children, and trying to discipline them, when I've tried almost everything in the book. And sometimes I let them choose what they want to do. I say, hey, because at some point in time, I say, look, this is what you did. Now, you did this wrong. What do you think your punishment should be? And I allow them to give me some feedback. They might say, well, Dad, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to clean up, I'm going to do this. Or, Dad, I want to go in the corner, I'll do this in the corner. But sometimes when you take the toys and you give them that, and you take the toys and put them in the corner, they know that in 10 minutes they'll be out the corner, so they can repeat this behavior again. But sometimes I know that, look, if I give them that little pack, they gonna think about it, So I think that communication between that parent and that child should always be open, where you discuss with them, like, this is what you did, you knew what was wrong. And then even afterwards, you embrace them and you talk to them, I love you and this and that. It's just that I think that over a period of time, there's culture shift. You have people that has been abused in their lives and they write these books and they totally against this because they suffered this abuse. You got people that ain't never got a whooping a day in their life and they feel that they can write this long biography or long book on this subject matter, and they've never had a spanking in their life, but they only going on statistics that come from a totally different arena where you grew up in. So I think that it has this, 50-50, it has, like Rosa says, sometimes it have those effects on children and sometimes it doesn't, so.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that we got a caller, but at any rate, now with regards to the issue of the, Now, with regards to the issue of the corporal punishment, I think that goes beyond what we consider to be, because it's really as you're looking at it and you're seeing all these states that are outlawing the whole issue of corporal punishment, and I think we got a call.
Panelists, I'm just calling in because I understand child abuse. I was a foster parent. But, they took out the discipline. You cannot discipline your kid at all. I mean, I've had foster kids. The only thing the kid's parents did was try to discipline the kid from stealing. And they took him away from him because they grabbed him by the arm and cursed him. Didn't put their hands on him. But when you go out and when that kid goes out in the street, the cops don't look at him like he's a kid, or they don't worry about the corporal punishment. That kid does something, you don't even have to have a gun, a knife, they'll blow his brains out. The kid does something, the parents are liable. I'm not saying you're supposed to just beat the crap. I remember when my father, they would be charging my father with assault with intent to kill, the way I used to get it when I was young. But I would like say I would bring home D's or F's. That was unacceptable. When he finished with me, the next report card was A's and B's. I'm serious. You would think. I heard Belay say he would think about stuff. If he didn't have no bad attitude for his father or his mother or his grandmother because they disciplined, we would turn out, it would be a lot better world if they would, I'm not saying, you shouldn't whip your kids, put whips all over them and all that. But pop your kid on the butt for doing something wrong and let them know there's repercussions and consequences for your actions, they done took that away from us. So we have to accept it. They call the cops on you. I mean, the teachers and the system will tell the kids that if your parents do anything to you, let us know. And they call and take a good kid away from a good home. A lot of these foster agencies that's got these kids, see, it's big money. Just like HUG, they making over, I think, $2-3 million a month just placing kids. And it's almost like, it's like a temp agency. They get the kids, take them out of a good home, put them in a bad home. The people ain't worrying about nothing but a paycheck. They don't care. Yeah, I mean, you got some that care about the kids, but the majority of them looking at a paycheck. So you honestly gave that kid some serious mental issues just by taking them away from a good home, placing them. And, I've seen both ends of it, I would think that it's a better way. They should let parents discipline the kids. I mean, in school, I would get it from my teacher if I acted up. Like Bly said, your neighbor saw you doing something, climbing somebody's window, they would tag you behind. Now your neighbors, everybody's scared of the kids. They scared the neighbors, the teachers. They're scared of the kids, and the kids running around ain't scared of nobody. So I know it's a double-edged sword, but it's something to think about anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's wrong?
Yeah, but anyway, I appreciate you guys accepting my call.
Okay, well, thank you for calling. I appreciate that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So I know that basically one of the things that when we talk about, and there's a significant studies and writings and literature out there when it comes to the African American communities that would suggest that the act of disciplining children by whipping them actually came from slavery. Has anybody ever heard that before?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that basically, you've heard that, haven't you, Doc? Yeah, but that's... Yeah, I mean, now I know that basically on the continent, it would be true if you didn't think on the continent that never happened. Mm-hmm. I think that obviously on the continent that it does, but there are those who believe that basically we incorporated that in punishing our kids because it was learned behavior from the slave master. That's not an anomaly. That is a very common among black psychologists who are against corporal punishment. That tends to be where they believe that is kind of like the catalyst of it. Mm-hmm. So, what do you think about that, Doc?
Well, just let me make a few other quick points, and I'll address that. Good conversation. I think 3 points. Fundamentally, we have to have balance. And, we go to these extremes, non-spanking, spanking, etc. We need balance. When you stop and think about the nature of the child, the young adult wants boundaries set. So by nature, a child is going to challenge authority. And what we do in the moment is going to define what that child does from that point on. So we have to look at, is it youthful defiance or is it just arbitrary negligence on the child's part that's going to determine our action at the end of the day? Secondly, when we look at the concept of violence, individuals are driven by pain and pleasure. It's been psychologically proven for decades across the board. Those two things drive. And so we have to look at certain communities and its perception. In black communities, I think the physical discipline is more inherent because of the circumstances. You'll lose your life a lot easier in a black community or a community of color if you don't immediately respond and have certain boundaries in place, whether that be on the street, whether that be with the police engagements, etc. So a lot of the parents will use that initial physical pain to get that instant response and let that child know you cannot cross these lines. Now, a balanced parent would come back and say, I'm going to use other forms of discipline to get my child in place. When we stop and think about discipline, let's be clear, discipline is self-control. You're teaching that child to control himself or herself. The other thing is, I remember in my day with my father, if I hadn't got the physical discipline, what was more impactful for me was the psychological discipline. So when my father disciplined me, which was very rare, if that physical discipline did not precede the psychological discipline, I would have been a confused individual because I wouldn't have understood why psychologically I was being put in this nexus, whereas the physical discipline allowed me to understand the psychological discipline, and so I was able to embrace it and get through it much better. True, to answer your question, when you talk about what we picked up in slavery, but let's be real clear. In the African culture, we had 5 components of manhood and womanhood development. And there was pain throughout that whole process, through the rites of passage. When the young boy would have to step into that manhood, he was put into venues where physical pain was dominant, even though it didn't come from the actual elders, it came from the experience. He had to go out and fight the lion. He had to go out and fight the warrior tribe. So we had that in, but it was the understanding of the necessity of why that was important. And I think what we see today is we lack that, and somebody said it so well, we lack that understanding of what that tool is used for. I think it is going to take a holistic approach when we discipline the child to have a thorough understanding of what is happening in the process. But I'll say this, I wouldn't blame anybody who did not or who did use discipline, because their personal circumstances has to dictate what's going on. And at the end of the day, let me tell you something, nobody's going to tell me what to do with my children to get my children to the point to where they need to be. You're going to look up, and at the end of the day, they're going to be looking at a life sentence or something else because you did not put the boundaries on board. So I had to do, all my children are grown, but I had to do whatever I had to do to make sure that those boundaries were clear, because I knew what my children were going to have to face had they come up. And at the end of the day, if they didn't, or if they got caught up in a situation where either they lost their lives or got imprisoned or got physically harmed, and I didn't set those boundaries, that was on me. And I clearly understood that. My wife clearly understood that. So I want to just be clear going back. I think Rosa said it well. I think Bilal said it so well, and I think it was echoed. I think you have to have some semblance of balance. And I think that's in everything we do in our society. We need that balance.
Yeah.
And that balance is communication as well. Because if you don't allow your children to be able to communicate with you, you're going to have a power struggle, because they're going to go right out there to society, and they're going to start listening to somebody out there on the streets, because we're not paying attention. See?
I would agree with you, but in adding to that, I would say this: your children are going to never communicate with you if they don't respect you.
Well,
yes. And if we don't put those defining mechanisms in place to dictate what the child can expect from us or what the child should not expect from us. The child should be crystal clear as elders, as parents, as those that are leading the child in the process, what we expect from that child. How can you condemn a child when that child does not know the boundaries of where they can and cannot go? So whatever it takes to establish that, my children don't have a problem whatsoever in respecting and communicating with me. They come to me first, but they know I'll give them a certain look, and they know at the end of the day, I've got to back up. Okay? So those kind of things have to be built. I agree with you. Communication is important, but most importantly, inclusion and respect that the child needs to be given should lead the process.
Okay, so respect. Let's talk about that word respect. We have a lot of people in our the way things are today, respect. The way children are being brought up today, the way we've been brought up, alcohol, drugs, technology, all of this, And then we have parents, because remember, none of us come with a parenting manual. None of us come with a parenting manual.
Very true.
So if we didn't come with a parenting manual, our parents didn't come with one, their parents didn't come with one. So to say this is that when children are in substance abuse, alcohol, workaholics are left behind. They have no one to be able to communicate with. You can't talk to an addict. You got both parents out there on drugs and alcohol. Now they're being raised, by themselves and then thrown out there, because if they even get with someone to say, oh, I care about you, it's over. It's over. And now you might be in the hands of somebody that has domestic violence issue, physical abuse, someone that has been traumatized themselves, because now the preyers prey on the vulnerable. And when the preyers prey on the vulnerable,
Well, that's why you have to go to the root cause. So quickly, I don't want to hog this mic, but again, that's why you have to go to the root cause. An addict, somebody out there slinging drugs, somebody's out there doing violence extremely, somebody's representing in the set, in the gang set. Those are symptoms of root causes that have not been dealt with. And far too often in our communities, we don't deal with the root cause because it's a lot easier to deal with the symptom. It takes some discipline, as we talked about, to deal with that root cause. So when we look at that, if you come in and telling me to stop this, don't do that, etc., but don't get to the real psychological trauma that caused me to do it in the first place,
That's right.
I'm gonna look at you like you're crazy and tell you to get up out of my face.
that's where the disrespect. That's where respect.
And respect comes when I can see that you can meet my needs, or you even have an understanding of my means. Far too often we step into these situations and we don't understand the person's normality, and they look at, how the heck you gonna help me when you don't even know what I've been through? Real quickly, when it came to the spanking component, I'll tell you, the spanking component for me was probably one of the best things that I got, because it gave me the ability to have an equilibrium as it related to my own children. I probably would have been far more abusive to my children had I not gotten the spanking, because I understood the degree of pain, I understood how I felt, and I understood what I didn't want them to feel in the process. So it gave me a reference point and a gauge to really say, okay, how can I use this component to deal with my actual children? But that was only me, and that's why I said, and I qualified, I would not go in any situation and tell somebody what they should or should not do. They have to use their own common sense, their own upbringing, and their own reference points to decide what's best for them. And then if it's against the societal norm, they've got to ask themselves, am I willing to face the consequence? So, that's a personal situation, in my opinion.
I was just going to say real quick, I mean, as far as the issue of respect, I think that's really one of the things that I see the most, and that bothers me, obviously with children, is that I'm bothered by bad kids.
About what?
By bad kids. And when I say bothered by bad kids, this is where I'm talking about.
Okay.
If I go to a movie theater, or if I go to a store, or if I go to a certain place and I see a child that's unruly and talking back to their parents, it bothers me because I'm not used to that. I did not allow my children to do it, and I could not do that. And the thing about it is that I cannot really see anything productive coming out of a child that basically is an unruly child, right? And they learn it early on, right? And so the problem, of course, when it comes to dealing with, and people say, well, there's not really bad children. But the reality of it is that if you cannot take your child out to a place and allow that, and that child disrespects you and will not do what you're telling them to do, that's a problem, man. That is a big problem. I don't understand. Like I said, I'm not a specialist. I'm just a parent. And the reason why it's a problem is because I don't understand that. I don't understand how, I never got in my mother's face. I never cussed at my mother. I could not do any of those things, right? Because I always knew that it was wrong. I didn't run around stores I didn't act up in restaurants. I didn't act up in public places. My children didn't run around stores. They didn't act up in public places. If I said, you need to sit down, you need to sit down. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of it. And basically what happens is that, you know, the reality of it is that I went out in the world. See, I wasn't under, you know, the thing about it is being raised as by a single mother is that when I went out into the world, I knew I had a lot of discipline, right? My career path was paramilitary things, going into the Marine Corps, you know, being a police officer. I was disciplined, playing sports, playing football. I was an extremely disciplined person. Mm-hmm. I don't know why, but I'm assuming it's because I was raised in a culture and in a situation where you had discipline. Mm-hmm. There's a certain way you carried yourself as a man, mm-hmm. right? And nowadays, we're very lacking on people carrying themselves, not necessarily disrespecting the parent or other people, but also having respect for yourself, mm-hmm. right? You don't do that. That you don't walk around looking this way. You don't dress this way. You don't do these things. Mm-hmm. And until the one important thing, and we talked about this last week, Ms. Banks and Ms. Harvey, the main thing that we have in our community that we're lacking is discipline. Mm-hmm. If we do not, and I'm not, and outside of spanking, I'm not suggesting that spanking is, I don't know the answer, mm-hmm. but I'm saying that if you don't have discipline, you will never be able to accomplish anything in this world, especially as a black person mm-hmm. or a minority, because you don't get those same chances. You see what I'm saying? So when you go out there and mama and daddy's not around and you act up, mm-hmm. oh, they got something for you.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And what they got for you is a whole lot worse than what I'm going to get at home mm-hmm. or what you're going to get. And that's what I told my kids, whether it's I'm taking something away from you, you can't play with this, you can't watch TV, you're grounded, whatever the discipline is, that's very minor to the way that the world is going to treat you, because my job is not to be your friend. Mm-hmm. I'm not your friend.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? That's not my job. My job is to be your parent.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. And you know what? There's some things I don't really want you to tell me. Mm-hmm. I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
And don't think you can come to me and you can tell me everything. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the way it is. But I'm saying that when you're talking about discipline, Ms. Banks, and I know you and I know your kids and I know that they're respectful and I know that they are disciplined, what that discipline is as you say, Doc, people have their own way of discipline. And you know what? A whooping is not always the answer to everything, because I don't think that's really what any of us are suggesting, because there's other ways of discipline. Yeah. But you know what? I think some people don't discipline their kids at all.
Mm-hmm. You know, that's called permissive parenting. Permissive parenting and authoritarian parenting are totally different. We have permissive parenting is where parents just let their children just do without doing the discipline. Mm-hmm. We have authoritarian parenting. It's also, you better do as I say and not as I do. But yet and still they're doing something totally different and not being that mentor for the children. So now there's no respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that there's a different way of going about each thing your child encounters or as far as your disciplinary measures, whatever you decide to do, whether it be spanking, putting them in the corner, giving them the timeout, so forth and so on. I think, it just depends, I can remember, my personal experience with my son. He had this thing with his video games with his phone, and he kept playing. I told him, don't download no games on his phone, just to give you a bet. He kept doing it and kept doing it. And at one point in time, he turned back around when I told him. He literally turned back around and walked away. And as he walking away, he pushed the download button and started downloading the website.
You know what that's
about? I walked up behind him, and I actually saw this. I took the phone from him. Now, I purchased the phone with my money, and I destroyed the phone on the spot. Well, I heard that was abuse.
It is.
Yeah, I was told that was abuse. But here's the thing. When I sat him down and I talked to him, I explained to him, it's not about the money factor. It's about you respecting me. That's what it's about. And I think that sometimes when stuff is taken away from us as parents, then these kids are left to go out inside of society and allow somebody else to do the disciplinary factor for them. And sometimes it's more graver than what you're going to give them at home. You know, I just dealt with an 11-year-old girl ran up in my building just last week and she told me that her father or her mother boyfriend had whipped her. Now I'm sitting there as a youth counselor, I'm sitting there like, okay, what is my response? Okay, now she's underage, so my response is, okay, to call authority, but because I have been through a similar situation, I can understand that these kids nowadays, they do anything. And I'm gonna tell you, the first thing that came out of her mouth is this: I don't wanna go to a foster home. This is what she said. These kids are intelligent. They know what they're doing. They do. But then once the police came, I realized that they had dealt with this young lady. They looked at her, they knew her. So they had dealt with this case several different times and walked her right back down to the house. And then the young lady come back and the next day and say, I just want to thank you for allowing me and talking to me. But they just want to be heard. But they will lie.
But where do they learn to lie? They have two parents. Hold on. They have two parents. Mm-hmm. Or whoever the caregiver is, or whomever is doing the being the caregiver of the child. You have two individuals, maybe one. Mm-hmm. Like I hear every week, every day, I hear so many things that have to do with lying. Okay, but children see things. Children are very smart. One thing I can say about children, they are very smart. And by the way, children are not BAD. They are smart. They're very intelligent. Mm-hmm. And when you start doing things you're not supposed to be doing, they're learning it.
And I'm going to tell you, they're shaped by everything in their school, and it starts off in home with Santa Claus coming down the chimney and Easter and the bunny having Easter egg. That's where they learn to lie from.
Yeah, and guess what they do? And now they learned it. And guess what they're doing? They're learning it. They're using it. And when you say children know how to manipulate, yeah, they learned it. But yet we want to punish them for something that they learned from us.
Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fan, and I probably should say this. I'm not a fan of CPS.
Can I share something with you, Mr. Ali?
Yeah.
I hear you to a certain extent, but I'm share something with you. As many individuals I have in my classes a week constitute child abuse. I'm not saying that we do, but there are individuals out there that came from dysfunctional families.
Right.
I mean, dysfunctional. I mean, if you could give me a perfect family, I sure would like to know. Please send them to me. I would like to go in their house and sit there for a long time.
Well, a lot of times where I see it, when I say that, is that sometimes it's not even related to that. But, you have children. A child could just have an accident, could fall and hurt themselves. Yeah. And then now and it does happen. I mean, a child could. I would be hesitant to take my child to the emergency room if they fell accidentally and happened to them, because I mean, they come in like the SWAT team.
Yeah, they do.
And before you ever get an opportunity to, and sometimes and what you go through, and sometimes you're dealing with human beings who sometimes I believe have agendas, and so I think that that creates, and sometimes I mean when you can't parent your child the way that you want to, then what happens is that basically you're just creating a lot of times children that's going to find themselves in juvenile hall and other places. Sometimes it's the lack of discipline that actually ends up getting kids into that, as opposed to people who are on drugs and beating their kids is a different story.
They shouldn't be parents anyway.
Yeah.
Well, 30 seconds real quick. Look, just don't lose the focus. The root cause and the reason why we punish our children is to set some type of boundaries in place so they will follow inherent rules and laws and structure, either of our own or of a societal component. So let's don't get caught up in the methodology. Whatever it takes to get that child to follow those rules so they won't go out there and destroy society and destroy everybody else because of lack of discipline and respect, that's what we got to enforce. We get so deep into how as opposed to the whys. The whys are the important thing. That's why I said I'm not going to criticize anybody for what they do. If I see at the end of the day that child is handling their business, I'm going to salute whatever the heck they're doing. So,
So anyway, so I think that I think it's a great discussion, and it's one that could be, because it's really complicated. It's almost really like it's a lot more deeper than, do I support corporal punishment or do I not support corporal punishment? Because there's a lot more involved in it, especially when we're talking about parenting.
It is. It's very much so.
Yeah. So.
And I think if it don't work, if something don't work, try something different. Don't just keep doing something over and over.
But I do want to share something with you.
I think we're going to run out of time. We only got 30 seconds left. But we're going to invite you back.
When you tell your child don't do, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
They going to do.
So at any rate, thanks you guys for tuning in. I wish we had some more time, but again, man, I appreciate it. It was a great subject matter, and we do need to discuss this because parenting is important.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, K292FQ Riverside, and K293CF Moreno Valley.
Your NBC Sports Radio update starts now.
Getting ready for World Series game number 4 and a thrilling finish on the college football gridiron. I'm Pete Fox. It was Kentucky and Missouri. Tigers were leading in the final seconds. Kentucky had the ball. A 2-yard pass would give them a 15-14 win. They are now 7-1. Number 15, Washington has a 7-6 lead on Cal. Number 14, Washington State. Number 24, Stanford tied at 14. Start of the second quarter there. Mississippi State, a 7-0 lead on number 16, Texas A&M. Syracuse all over number 22, NC